A $51,000 email invoice scam. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian Heiser here and welcome to another episode of Heiser Says. Grab your stein of coffee because I want to have a look at this article from the ABC because, well, for all of us in small business, how many of you just email PDF invoices to clients without a second thought? I do it all the time. I just did it recently. And well, being in the building game, I'm not surprised that sometimes it takes a lot longer to get paid than the terms I give on my invoice. That's just how you have to deal with it sometimes. Particularly when you work with big builders, they set the terms of when they want to pay you, when they feel like. You just have to cop it. So, this one is a bit of a scary one, really. So, tradies frustrated by banks as business email scam costs them $51,000. Now, let's pull this apart a bit because we'll have to see who's responsible for this. So, as Jane Fleming lit the candles on her son's birthday cake, she was preoccupied with a substantial sum of missing money, $51,000 to be precise. I mean, it's good to see how the reporters here from the ABC, Amy and Loretta, are doing a good way to frame a narrative, frame a picture to get you emotionally invested. It was a horrible day. I just felt sick all day, just wondering where the 50 grand was, she said. It was her son's 9th birthday that she realized she'd transferred that amount into a scammer's bank account. Jane helps run the family building business, and in May, she was arranging to pay $51,000 to a subcontractor. I thought, it's a huge invoice, I'll break it up into 2 payments until we got more funds to pay for the whole invoice, she said. She'd worked with concreter Simon O'Donnell for almost a decade, making countless payments to him in that time. But a couple of days after Jane transferred the funds, Simon called her husband asking where his money was. Sometimes that happens, sometimes things get delayed. Sometimes people just, particularly in business, if you've got a relationship like that, if someone has a bit of trouble paying you on time, you'll give them time, usually. But also, you'd be a bit worried if the money hasn't appeared. I had my bank account on my computer screen right in front of me, and there was no money in there, Simon said. His wife said in the background something to the effect of, I paid Simon. He was the one that changed his bank details. Then the penny dropped. Simon realized he had been scammed. He said such a substantial loss of money was a kick in the guts in an already difficult period. You feel completely helpless, he said. So the poor guy, he's out the 51 grand. So, I've, from my angle, done nothing wrong. I finished a good job for someone. He was happy with the job, and I'm a lot of money out of pocket for 6 months, during which the pandemic hasn't been ideal. But the money was gone, and so began Simon and Jane's efforts to get it back. So, when Jane received the $51,000 invoice from Simon, she did notice his bank account details had changed and updated his details before transferring the money. We hadn't used Simon for 6 months, so I thought he's possibly changed it over that period of time. Oh, damn. The email itself didn't seem unusual, and it showed clear details of the job that had been completed. So, slab invoice received on May. Matt attached his invoice for today's slab at Montmarais. Went really well, yada yada yada. Service from Boral was spot on. So there you go. So they've copied stuff he said in the email. But after looking at the email Simon sent and the one Jane received, it was clear something was off. Simon's outbox showed he sent the invoice to Jane at 4:56 p.m. on a Friday, but it didn't appear in her inbox until 7:30 a.m. on Saturday. According to Associate Dean of Computing and Security at Edith Cowan University, Associate Professor Paul Huskley Doland, someone had gained access to either Simon or Jane's computer and was waiting for an opportunity like this. The doctor believes hackers gained remote access by hacking the builder's website and surreptitiously redirecting visitors to another site which installed malicious software. So potentially having direct access to the computers and monitoring them, perhaps keeping an eye on them for a while, getting a feel for the kind of invoices that are being sent that way, he said. It's that control that has allowed the attackers to manipulate and modify emails between the two parties in this particular case. He said the hackers may have had access to the computer for months or even longer, and a late afternoon invoice was a prime target. An end-of-day invoice coming through, what they know that the receiving company isn't going to look at their email, that opens up an opportunity and it gives them a time to analyze the email to examine the attached invoice, he said. Yeah, there you go. The invoice Jane received looked exactly the same as the one Simon sent. I mean, was the invoice in a PDF, guys? How could you... Oh, boy. I mean, could they get between... So either they got on the computer of the users, so would your virus software need to detect that? Or do they get between the email, and are they rerouting all the emails from his domain? Could that be happening as well? I'd like to know a bit more about how he's actually sending these things, sending these invoices. So, the doctor examined the fraudulent invoice and said the alteration could only have been made by a person. The email would have been intercepted, potentially via automated means, and would have been modified by human means, he said. So scammers are stealing millions from businesses. Jane and Simon fell victim to a sophisticated business email compromise scam. I didn't know that an invoice could be intercepted between a supplier and ourselves and altered, Jane said. I mean, have you encountered this, guys? I mean, we've had hackers get into our, staff visit inappropriate websites, get into our network and start encrypting all our data and then threatening us. We managed to catch it. We managed to catch it real quick. So they only encrypted because the way our data was mapped, I had A drive as the archive project. So they just started encrypting a whole lot of our archive stuff, all the projects, which I had on backup. We were lucky. We were lucky. It's because I think there was a version of Windows I had on that machine for the staff member which hadn't updated all the security patches. So that's how they got through. I had a mate, the same thing happened. All his servers, everything got done. He ended up paying them. Then he did a bodgy with an IT guy to get money back on insurance. So, but this is the first time I've encountered this. I'm going to ring up the builder who I sent an invoice to last month to see how it's going. Last year, ScamWatch said BEC scams netted 5.3 million across Australia. I mean, here's the thing. Could this be... I'm just thinking with the Pay ID... Because you assign that to a bank, could a third party start moving those around as well? So it's the same email or same mobile number and it gets sent somewhere else. But when those... Okay, so last year ScamWatch said BEC scams netted 5.3 million across Australia. But when those losses were combined with data from other government agencies and the Big Four banks, a total of 132 million was recorded. So far this year, ScamWatch has received 1,099 reports of business email compromise scams worth 3.7 million in losses. Small Business Ombudsman Kate Carnell said the average amount businesses lost was $10,000 per transaction. Just recently, a survey was done of nearly 2,000 small businesses, and 62% of them have been hit by some level of cybersecurity breach. And this one, the invoice intercept, is now the most common. That's it. I'm definitely calling the last people I sent invoices out for. 'Cause, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. Could it be? I'd be interested to see if it's compromised, if the risk is compromised by using a particular piece of software. So, say if they're sending it from, I mean, that's complicated if they're going in there, editing it and changing it. If they're sending it from QuickBooks or MyOb or that type of thing. Because I've ditched all that and gone to just manual Word and PDFs. What we're seeing is a significant increase, and some of that increase we think is because people are working from home with less secure systems. So who's behind the keyboard? Tracking who was behind the scam that cost Simon and Jane is much more difficult than figuring out how it was done. Jane and Simon both had their computers examined for signs of malware and came up with nothing. It's quite possible that the malware has been removed by the attackers because the attack has been successful, the doctor said. Or did they redirect all of his emails from his domain? Could it be possible that they're redirecting the email from his domain to an intermediary and intercepting it like that? Doing a pass-through. Could you check that with a routing test? IT guys, let me know. They achieved their goal, they've taken the money, and now they're erasing their tracks. Despite Simon's email address appearing as the sender of both the fraudulent $51,000 invoice and a lesser $804 invoice, metadata shows each invoice was actually sent by a different email address. The ABC tracked down the person who owned one of the addresses to find out he too had been hacked. The scammers had used his email to target others and managed to successfully scam a Canberra builder out of $20,000. So police are almost powerless. Victoria Police is investigating what occurred with Simon and Jane, but justice is far from assured. The site associated with the hack of the builder's website is based in Singapore, which puts it out of reach of the state's police. Police also believe the scammers have withdrawn money from an ATM in South Africa, further hampering the investigation. Well, could this be another argument to host your website here in Australia? I host with Ventra IP for my website. You can find a referral link down below. It is more expensive than offshore providers, but I like the fact that I can talk to someone with an Australian accent that's local, that I can understand. We had originally, when I first started, I went with one of these dodgy overseas ones. I can't remember the name. And I lost email because it all got compromised. And from then I said, nope, I'm going with an Australian provider. And I've had no problems with them. But see, I also host everything with Microsoft now. I don't even have my own email server anymore. I guess who would? Local police officer, detective leading senior constable David Morrison, is now trying to figure out who's behind the web of Australian bank accounts used to funnel the money overseas. Unfortunately, at this stage, I've not been able to identify the account holder of the offending account, and it is possible the account was opened online under a false name and address, he told the ABC in a statement. He said he had contacted multiple banks involved in a bid to trace the money. I've received some information as to the account holder's details. However, I am yet to receive information regarding the movement of the monies, leading senior constable Morrison said. Attempts are still being made to identify the account holders of the relevant accounts. However, again, it is fairly probable that these accounts were opened under false names. In separate correspondence with Victoria Police, Jane was told any further investigation is unlikely to result in a successful prosecution of the party responsible. Yeah, it looks like they've gotten away with it, guys. The reason is Victoria Police has no jurisdiction in South Africa, and Interpol will only investigate fraud matters in excess of $1 million loss, it said in an email. Well, I learned something new there. That shows you why they target all these small amounts, doesn't it? Leading Senior Constable Morrison said the matter would likely be passed on to the Australian Federal Police. But the priority of the AFP is to investigate cybercrime threats against Commonwealth government departments, critical infrastructure and information systems of national significance, meaning Jane and Simon's case may come to a dead end. So what are the banks doing? A cybersecurity specialist, Dr. Haskell Downland, picked through the trail of foreign servers and hacked emails. He questioned what Australian banks were doing to stop this type of crime. In terms of how to improve the situation, certainly the banks would have to be the place to start, he said. There's relatively few of them compared to the number of computers, for example, the number of victims out there in Australia. Banks have a legal obligation to verify the information used to set up bank accounts. According to Victorian Police, it appears the Commonwealth Bank account which Jane deposited the money into was likely set up online using a false name and address. Dr. Haskell Dowland said that could be prevented by strict in-person identity checks, removing the opportunity for people to do this electronically without undertaking some form of formal verification. Jane said she's been going in circles trying to get help from the banks and regulators. CBA said they weren't negligent, and then AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, said we're not in the jurisdiction because we're not customers of CBA, Jane said. They then said to contact ASIC, who pointed us back to AFCA. Jane has since received an email from the CBA declining her request for a refund, telling her she'd need to approach your financial institution, Bendigo Bank, and lodge a complaint for the funds. I'd like to see this resolved by CBA, acknowledging that they are negligent in allowing criminals from overseas to operate in Australia, she said. I feel like they're making it really easy. It sounds like anyone can open a bank account with any name, and then I can put my money into that account in another business name, and there's no alarm bells going off. Well, yeah, I always thought the account name was kind of meaningless. Does it mean anything? The account name, it's just the BSB and the number. What about PayID? Is that going to mitigate this risk? There's the question. You know, if someone sends an email going, please pay to this email address, if it's obviously changed, that's going to be quite... Because then that email address is locked. And you can... The thing is, at the back end, you can move that around to wherever you want. But can another party do that? That's the risk there. That's the question I have. Could that be a way to mitigate this? I mean, if someone sends you an invoice and they change their account numbers, you should ring up and check, particularly if you've been doing business with them for that long. But I can appreciate that you... Well, normally there should be big text going, we've changed our account number too. Maybe you should just ring and check. So, the Commonwealth Bank said it acted quickly to block the account, which is now closed, as well as providing information to authorities. Despite the commitment and best efforts of regulators, law enforcement agencies, and the banking industry, such frauds and scams sadly still occur, the bank said in a statement. It is widely recognized that scams are becoming increasingly sophisticated, which has prompted increased investment across the sector in resources, systems, data, and intelligence to combat fraud and alert the Australian public to the risk the community faces. Jane lodged an AFCA complaint to the Bendigo Bank in the hope of resolution. Well, you can't really blame the bank, can you? What did they do? They just processed a request you put through. In response, the bank said it tried to recover the money as soon as it was made aware of the situation. The correct procedures were followed to notify the other financial institution and to request a recall of the funds, the bank said. Because of the time delay between the funds being sent and notifying Bendigo Bank of the fraud, the likelihood of recovery for any other financial institutions would be very low. The bank advised that those affected were ultimately unsuccessful. Those efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. The ABC asked the Bendigo Bank about Jane's case, but it declined to comment while the matter was still before the AFCA. So double check your invoices. Double check them, guys. The Australian Financial Complaints Authority said it was working with the industry and other stakeholders to try to minimize invoice hacking scams. To avoid falling victim to invoice hacking scams, consumers should call the supplier to confirm the correct account details before transferring large amounts of money, especially if they received an email from the supplier saying their account details have changed. AFCA lead Ombudsman, Banking and Finance, Evelyn Hall said in a statement. It's advice both Jane and Simon can't endorse strongly enough. The concreter now sends a text with every invoice he sends, while Jane calls the sender to check details before paying. Just any invoice that you get, check if it's a new account with a new BSB and account number. Just call your supplier and confirm that that is their details, she said. Another way to do it is to pay people by check. The slow and all the way. I would really be interested to see if PayID could mitigate this, because then it would be quite obvious if it's going to a different destination. But then again, if it's a mobile number, that's no different to a bank account number. People can change their mobiles all the time. We'll have to see, guys. What do you reckon? Do you know people who've fallen for this scam? And it's pretty sophisticated. It really is just a subtle change. A subtle change. That's... Well, you have to check the metadata too for all your emails. You know, when it says from, you need to look where it actually is. That could be a sign then. I feel sorry for these people. 50 grand. That's not chump change. It's a lot of concrete. Damn. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think. like, share, and subscribe to the channel. What would you do to address this issue? If you're a fan of the channel and want to support the content I create here, there are a few ways you can. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us using our affiliate links at Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or KuCoin. You can buy merch from Heise Says, use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, or support us via PayPal. Take care, everyone. I'll see you next time.